although in Israel you might be given to misunderstand that there is a racial Jew. There is no such thing as a racial Jew. There's black Jews, there's Ethiopian Jews, there's European Jews, there's Chinese Jews, and so on. There's no such thing as a racial Jew as such. But even the term Jew and Judaism was not heard by Moses. It was not heard of by Solomon. It was not heard of by David. They never heard these terms. These are new words. In fact, this was a basin. What is now part of Kazakhstan and parts of Eastern Europe, where these particular Jews converted to Judaism. We don't have, again, this can go on for hours upon hours, but long and short of it is that people who were living in this particular region, at some point in history, they converted to Judaism. Once they converted to Judaism, they traveled. They went to places like Poland. They went to places like Germany. They settled in other areas, and so they intermingled with the various Nordic races, and you had what was called the European Jewish race, the Khazar race, or what they call them, the Ashkenazi, who are holding the reins of power in Israel and in all parts of the world. Those neoconservatives that you saw, they are the Ashkenazi. I'm not saying, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying Jews are controlling the world or Jews are taking over the economy, but it just so happens that those people there can be descendants of the Khazars. They are Jewish of origin. Maybe they might not be practicing Jews, but they've got a particular Zionist leanings in favor of the state of Israel. As many people will tell you, some of the strongest opponents of the state of Israel are Orthodox Jews, like the Neturai Karta, for example. So I'm not saying Jews are bad people, like some Muslims will come and tell you, or they'll come with hate speech on the protocols of the elders of Zion, which in fact was a 19th century fabrication in an event. But the point is that this is the kind of region where these people came from, and they moved and they traveled to Sweden, they traveled to Germany, and so on. Back then we had the Byzantine Empire. This was the Khazar kingdom in the early 10th century. These people here converted to Judaism, and they had nothing to do. So they can't claim to even have rights to the state of Israel, because they're not what we call the Sephardic Jews. You know, the Sephardic Jews are the Jews who are the closest to the Palestinians in terms of their racial origins. They might have a claim on the basis that 2,000 years perhaps their ancestors stayed there or resided there and so on, but they should live in harmony with the Palestinians. These Khazar Jews, European Jews, have absolutely no claim to Israel, but they are the ones who are controlling the power. So even in Israel today, you have levels of hierarchy. You have the Ashkenazi, European Khazar Jews. Then you have below them, you've got the American Jews. Then you've got below them, you've got the Sephardic Jews. Then you've got the Ethiopian Jews, who are the black Jews, right in the bottom of the pile, who are discriminated. And lastly, you get the Palestinians. So even amongst Jewry themselves, there's high levels of discrimination that is taking place in the state of Israel, which is not being exposed in the mass media for what it's worth. Before the BC, the term Jew was never heard of, and the term Jewish nation was never heard of. We had the tribes of Israel, or the original tribes of Israel, or the children of Israel. The word Israel did exist. And that's, of course, where you get its derivatives, Israeli and so on. That did exist, of course, at one particular point in time. El, meaning God, Isra, God, or, as you see in the context of the Bible, there's a history behind those particular words. The tribe of Israel did exist, or the followers of Moses. But what were the original followers of Moses? What faith did they believe in? Islam. So the point is that over time in history, they had what they call the developed structures in their society. They had the Sanhedrin, like the Jamiat al-Ulama. They had their own Jamiat al-Ulama back then, the Sanhedrin. So the Sanhedrin, or the so-called Jewish Board of Deputies, they created this priestly structure, and the original teachings of Moses was distorted into laws and archaic rulings and so on. I hope I have the time to deal. We dealt with this in Pretoria in a limited sense when we were discussing the authenticity of the Quran and the Bible, but they perverted the original message. Now, the children of Israel would be the original followers of Moses. The development in terms of of the kind of discrimination that exists between them, the children of Ishmael, and the children of Isaac or Ishaq, also evolved at a later point in time. Just give you one example. You see, we are told here that in the book of Genesis, and since you've raised it, I wasn't going to discuss this, but since you have raised it now, I might as well just deal with it. In Genesis chapter 21, it speaks about Hagar and Ishmael sent away. Now, why were they sent away? Why? Because according to the version given here, the child or the boy Ishmael basically laughed and mocked at Isaac, and so they were banished and so on. So the child was, Sarah saw the son of Hagar, the Egyptian Hajra, which she had born unto Abraham, mocking. So the child was mocking. And so they sent the child away. Now, at the time that this incident occurred, how old was Ishmael when the child was banished? When Ishmael was banished and when Hajra was banished? How old? We're told that Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born. Ishmael was born when Abraham was how many years? How many years? 86 years old, 86 years old. So Isaac was 86, Ishmael was born when Abraham was 86 years old. Isaac was born when Abraham was 100 years old. How old was Ishmael when Isaac was born? 14. Now, when they were banished, Isaac was 3 years old, which means how old would Ishmael have been? If Isaac was, he would have been 17. 17. So when this incident occurred, Ishmael was supposed to have been 17 years old. But look at this, of a 17-year-old boy and his mother. Read the incident. Look at this. This is what we are told. He's 17 years old, and his mother and him had been banished. Verse 14. And Abraham rose up early in the morning and took bread and a bottle in water and gave it unto Hagar, putting it on her shoulder and putting Ishmael on the shoulder, and sent her away. Verse 15. And the water was spent in the bottle, and she cast the child under one of the shrubs. And she went and sat down over against him a good way, as if it were bowshot. For she said, let me not see the death of the child. Imagine that this old woman, Hagar, was an old lady, older than most of your grandmothers here, probably close to 90s, and she's got this 17-year-old boy, and she's concerned about his safety. She puts him under the tree, makes sure that death doesn't come to him, carries him on the shoulder. Let me not see the death of the child. And God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water, and she went and filled the bottle with water and gave the lad to drink. And God was with the lad, and he grew and dwelt in the wilderness and became an archer. Now, problem, if this is the basis, because they say that Ishmael and Hajar were banished because of the mockery of Ishmael, the authenticity of this particular passage is questioned. Why? Because at the time when the incident was supposed to occur, Ishmael was supposed to have been 17 years old. Ishmael and his mother Hajra were banished when Isaac was 3 years old, which means he's 17. No doubt about that. But the narration we're given here is as if it's a little infant. So that raises, and that's what many biblical scholars have said, this entire passage now comes into question in terms of its views. Of course, there's a history in terms of how it evolved and how it came about. We don't have time to go into that right now. But the whole notion of Ishmael and Isaac and the kind of discrimination between them holds no water under Islam. That's what we believe. Both Ishaq, Isaac, is our prophet. He was a prophet of Islam. Ishmael or Ismail is also a prophet of Islam. These were all prophets of Islam. And so the concept of discrimination between the free woman and the slave woman doesn't play a significant role. These evolved at later times. So coming to your question, if there was a children of Israel, which is Yaqub, Israel is another name for Jacob, Yaqub alayhi salam. And how does he get the name? Well, according to the Bible, we are told, and this is not what we accepted, but according to the Bible, God comes down and has a wrestling match with Jacob. Just like in WrestleMania, they're having a wrestling match, he wrestles with him, and I think he dislocates Jacob's shoulder, or something happens, and then God tells him, because you have had a wrestling match with me, your name shall no longer be Jacob, but it shall be called Israel, for you have fought with God and you basically won. You won the wrestling match. in a manner of speaking. Now, that basically raises a number of questions in terms of received wisdom, in terms of what we have. So, when I say all these are prophets of Islam, I'm saying in the broader sense, they were Muslims, they were not Jews, they were not Christians, they evolved at a later time. Doesn't mean to say now that because you are Jewish or Christian, if you are sincere, that you are damned forever as such. We don't have such kind of bizarre ideas, but we'll deal with salvation when we come to and cross the bridge at that particular point in time. It's just important to know the background, that when you discuss Islam to an audience, any audience, you need to contextualize it. Don't just throw stones at other people, or what you find some of these missionaries and priests and also within our communities want to throw stones at each other. You need to understand the faith in its broader context. And you can only understand the faith in its broader context if you have the understanding and the background in terms of what the Quran basically tells you, what it promulgates, what its views are, what its ideas are, and so on and so forth. So it's important to know that. Moving on to Hinduism. Again, something which is amorphous and vague. Term Hinduism, who invented the term Hinduism? The Muslims, the British. The British colonial occupiers. Ism, communism, Buddhism, Marxism, Confucianism, capitalism, and so on. It's an ism. Originally, there were a whole lot of beliefs in India. That's why you find that there's not a single set of beliefs. Of course, they've got Upanishads and the Vedas, which go into volumes and volumes. But even the epics like the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, most of them are like writings of mythology. That's why you find wars between gods and men, just like in Roman mythology and in Greek mythology, gods and men fighting with each other. Gods getting married, engaging in adulterous affairs, having sex, that kind of thing. There's an example about, which is used, I think, in the tape. If you get a tape called From Hinduism to Islam, which I think is available, gives an example of Ramayana, from the Ramayana, who's one of the gods in the pantheon, that when his wife was kidnapped, Sita, by Ravana, he took Sita, the wife of Rama, across the Indus Valley, across the sea. And for 12 years, Rama, being a god, could not cross the ocean. He didn't know that dead wood floats. So what he did is that they were taking rocks, and he had help from the Hanuman, which was the god of the monkeys, and they put rocks in the ocean, rocks upon rocks upon rocks, until a big bridge grew, and then they walked across. But he couldn't float across with dead wood, knowing full well, if he was a god, how is it that he doesn't know that dead wood floats? You see? And for 12 years, if someone takes one's wife away, if someone has your wife behind closed doors for 10 seconds, what will you do? You want to break the door down. But for 12 years, being God, someone kidnaps the wife and he takes... So the point I'm trying to say is that these stories, sometimes for entertainment, sometimes to maybe impart certain moral lessons. Of course, there are moral lessons in the Upanishads, in the Vedas, in the Puranas, and so on. But more often than not, writings of mythology, and it could be possible that maybe, since the Quran says every nation has received a guide, that people like Krishna and Rama may have been prophets of God, and their original message might have been distorted or constructed and so on, based on various idiosyncrasies of people, based on the developed myths that people evolve around men. Even in our communities, you know, we have so-called people going to saints and so on, you know. And sometimes, I'm not saying people are not pious. There are lots of pious people in the community which we need to associate with and get some kind of moral upliftment. That was, of course, the Indus Valley, as I had explained. Hinduism comes from the word Indus, Indus Valley, land of Hind. So you get the word Hindu, Hindi, Indus. That's a land. Comes from the Indus Valley, Indus Valley. Islam doesn't come from a land. Christianity comes from a name. Judaism comes, it's a label. Christianity is a label. Islam is not a label. So make that distinction when you discuss with people how religions evolve, where they come from, who develop them, and so on. So, relevant issues. Every human being is born pre-formatted to submit to God. Just don't need to take down word for word, but just basically encapsulate what it says here. Number 2, human beings have free choice. Number 3, there is no compulsion in religion. La ikraha fid din, let there be no compulsion in religion, for truth stands out distinct from falsehood. People have a right to choose what they want to. You can't impose your value systems on them. You can't impose religion on them. And that also gives a lie to the allegation which was made in the past where people said Islam was spread by the sword. How do you impose your faith on the sword? If I want to tell you to walk from, to basically eat cockroaches, and I put a gun to your head and you eat it, are you doing it out of your free will? You have a repulsion to it. So if I hold a sword to your neck and say, accept Islam or die, and you say, yes, I accept Islam, are you accepting Islam? So how can you say to be a Muslim? Can you see the point? It's a, what they call this, a self-contradictory in terms. It can't be spread by the sword. Beliefs. Gandhi himself said that people who believe that religion can be spread by force are fools, who know nothing of the present state of affairs in terms of the world affairs and so on. De Lacy O'Leary, in his book Islam at the Crossroads, said that the legend of fanatical Muslims to Islam at the point of the sword is one of the most fantastically absurd myths that people have ever repeated. Not true. In Islam, we believe in the concept of being born without inherited sin. Now, does anyone know what inherited sin is? Sin of Adam. You see, the question I'd like to ask people is when they say our sin's inherited, is that when Adam ate from the forbidden tree, whatever it may be, we say it's an apple, maybe it's something else. It's a symbol. Apples are symbols. What you have is symbols, basically metaphors. But when Adam ate from the apple, whatever it was, did he ask your permission? So why should you be liable for what he did? According to the Bible, 4,000 years ago, which we know is not true because man's first appearance on the earth goes back to 100,000 years ago. If you are doing evil, should your father be liable for that evil? So in Islam we say people are born without inherited sin. But there's nothing novel in this. If a Christian says, well, the wages of sin are death, we are now living under grace because of the bloodship of Jesus. And they say that the greater the sin, the greater the redemption. The greater the sin, greater the redemption. So the question I'd like to know is, what kind of redemption is this?